If you enjoy today's content, then please consider supporting Top Hat Gaming Man on Patreon. Yeah! Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Top Hat Gaming Man here. An on-running subject matter we have been looking at on this channel over the last year has been on the history of cancelled games consoles. I have now covered over a dozen of these stories and look to plough forward as we dig deeper and deeper into the depths of this subtopic. Some of you may so far have been surprised at the sheer amount of console projects there have been out there, which have simply had the plug pulled on them for a number of reasons. We have looked at plenty of these unknown beasts of machines from the likes of Sega, Atari, Nintendo and more. Even as recently as just last week we looked at the Wow Wow, a 1992 cancelled CD-ROM based games console by Japanese arcade giant Taito. Today we are going to be taking a look at what we know about a console project from yet another Japanese Goliath of a gaming corporation, this time in the form of Konami. But before we take the plunge, let us once again start off by taking a brief look at the company's history. Yeah! Konami started life in the summer of '69. Times are changing and the chairman of the company, Keijimasa Kazuki, is looking at everything that's come and gone. Previously, this gentleman in question had run a successful jukebox rental and repair business in Osaka. However, despite this being the best days of his life, he knew that it was now or never, and transformed his business into a manufacturer of amusement machines for arcades. Their first coin-op operated game would finally see release in 1978, and came in the form of Block Game, Block Invader, Spaceship and Space King. By the time 1979 rolled around, Konami was shipping products all the way to the United States of America. Real success for Konami and global acclaim would occur for the company in 1981, with the release of an all-time classic known as Frogger. This simple game, where you play as a frog crossing a road and river, was so successful that it was cloned to bloody buggery in a number of bootleg forms. You could not get away from these frog-based games for a while, and it was all thanks to Konami. The company had other big hits that year too though, in the form of both Scramble and Super Cobra, to name a few. The money Konami made from all of this allowed them to set up a subsidiary on US soil, which allowed them to spread their wings and start developing games for the highly popular Atari VCS platform, all in all spreading their influence across the world of gaming. Moving into the following year of 1983, that pesky North American Atari crash occurred. Basically, the general public of the United States decided they were sick of playing games on dated hardware, and collectively decided they did not want to give Atari any more of their hard-earned money. Savvy Konami, however, were astute to this, and shifted their focus towards developing their games for microcomputers, which eventually ended up taking over Europe for a while. Most notable of all though, when it comes to Konami and microcomputers, were the games they outputted onto the MSX range of computers. Konami were perhaps the greatest publisher of all for these platforms, releasing over 70 different games in total, which included big hits such as Vampire Killer and Ganbei Goemon. Moving forward into 1985, Nintendo Entertainment System Fever began to sweep America, and as a result, savvy Konami began developing a number of games for that platform too. The following years led to Konami's biggest growth period to date, debuting games such as Gradius, Castlevania, Twinbee, Contra and Metal Gear. The success of the company's NES titles led to Konami earning $10 million in 1987 and all the way up to a hefty $300 million by 1991. That same year, Konami moved their headquarters to Tokyo, and by the end of 1992 were outputting games for the Super Nintendo, PC Engine and Sega Mega Drive. Konami were now one of the largest third-party developers on the entirety of planet Bloody Earth. As we are all aware, the Konami momentum for a good while just kept rolling forward, especially into the Sony PlayStation era, with games such as Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear Solid and Kichichiro Toyama's Silent Hill becoming two of the most memorable games for the entire platform. So, With all of this outrageous success Konami had for developing games across various home consoles, microcomputers and the arcade market, it was logical that Konami must have considered a console down the line, at the very least. After all, who could have possibly have known more about running a successful gaming business than Konami at the time? Gamersutra.com sheds light on this possibility, with interviews from a number of former Konami employees, including Yoshitaka Murayama, who worked on a number of the Suikoden games. Murayama states that he joined Konami as a new graduate in 1992, in the role of a programmer. To quote this man, he has this to say: "In my second year, after joining the department I was in, I was put in charge of creating games for Konami's games machine, and that was when I got involved in game design. So it was an extremely secret project inside of Konami. There were very few people involved. So, even though I was close to being a new recruit, I was expected to play a very large role. The plan at first was for Konami's games machine to be a console type, and it was suggested that it would have a card reader function to allow players to exchange data. The plan changed midway from a console type to a portable type games machine, and it was going to have 3D polygon functionality that was not common at the time. So, in a way, this story is extra interesting, as it is essentially covering two cancelled Konami consoles in one video, in the form of both a handheld and a home system. In regards to the handheld, which as we just mentioned, development switched to later, Murayama goes on to mention that the platform would have been cartridge based, and was intended to be somewhat like the Game Boy with a much higher class feel. If this system had come into fruition, it sounds like it could have potentially been pretty groundbreaking. After all, this was 1992, and we did not really receive a proper handheld with lots of polygons until the Nintendo DS 13 years later in 2005. Murayama also mentions that all designs of this platform are now apparently lost, which is why he drew the comparison to the Game Boy in this interview. Further to this, he states that he was working on both an RPG and a fighting game for the cancelled platform, whilst another team were working on a racing game and two further RPGs. These titles were all completely abandoned. However, Murayama paid a small homage to the lost RPG by reusing one of the characters' names, which was Ted within his Suikoden game. In regards to the total abolishment of Konami's system project, Murayama states that it all came to a grinding halt with the news of the Sony PlayStation being on the horizon. So the whole company reshifted its focus onto developing titles for that platform instead. Another gentleman who mentions this Konami console was Masaki Kukino, who worked on arcade games such as Asterix, Silent Scope and Haunted Castle, the Castlevania arcade game, just to name a few. He mentions that Konami were looking to release a system around 1994, which is of no surprise really, considering that was around the period that every bugger under the sun released a platform. After the success they had seen with Nintendo and Sega, everyone wanted a piece of the bloody pie. To quote Kukino, with regards to this platform's termination, he states that "I was not an insider with regards to the home division, but here is what I think. Probably technology wise, developing hardware for a home console was no problem for Konami. But when it comes to costs, in terms of developing a console that is, technologically speaking, really capable and high capacity, and then having it make money while maintaining that high capacity was maybe a challenge for Konami. The other possible challenge is distribution, so probably the company had to make a comprehensive analysis of business feasibility and opted out." So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the story of Konami's rise towards developing a game console and ultimately why they decided to stay third party. The interviews with both Kukino and Murayama can both apparently also be found within part of a trilogy of books known as The Untold History of Japanese Game Developers, a series of books I intend to procure for myself and read in detail very soon. The rabbit hole of cancelled games consoles just seems to get deeper by the week, and the more I read and research this subject, the more impressed I become of what simply could have been. Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoy learning about cancelled games consoles, I have created a whole playlist featuring over a dozen cancelled consoles which never featured commercial releases. Further to this, I create all sorts of gaming trivia videos on this channel, so if you like what you see, I would appreciate it if you liked, subscribed, hit the notification bell and left a comment to let me know what your thoughts are on today's content. Which gaming stories would you like to see me cover on here next? Finally, my channel, Top at Gaming Man, is partly funded from the fantastic support and donations I receive from my top-notch Patreon supporters. So, shout-outs in the credits to Carl Johnson, Shizuka Kobayashi, Greg Hooper, Richard Clark, Harold Webb, Sint Spaces, Kevin Verhaley, David Mountford, Andrew B. Zansky, Edward O'Reilly, Tom Elliott, Marcus Hines, Gary Pinkett, The Gaming Muso, SpongeMatt B, Krang DX, Stuart McDermott, Nash Quad, Michael Baker, and all of my other patrons. You are making my dreams more realistic by the day.